Penguin Random House Audio presents The Museum of Other People, From Colonial Acquisitions to Cosmopolitan Exhibitions, by Adam Kuper. Read for you by Marisa, Calin. Chapter 1. The Museum of Other People. Since at least the 15th century, Europe's 1% collected Greek and Roman antiquities, Renaissance art, and Chinese ceramics. Their gardens flaunted exotic trees. For entertainment, perhaps instruction, they had cabinets of natural curiosities and artificial curiosities, with freaks of nature, bizarre devices, instruments of torture, titillating images. In the last decades of the 18th century, a few grand collections were put on public show. The venues came to be known as museums, shrines of the muses. At first, only select visitors were admitted. The Hermitage insisted on court dress. The Louvre gave privileged access to artists. As late as 1808, anyone who wished to enter the British Museum had to submit a written application. Gradually, more and more museums opened to the public, though children were not welcome. In 1848, 2 Chinese scholars were dispatched to examine these new institutions. They reported that there were Jigong-lo, buildings for collections of bones, Wang Chong-yuan, gardens of everything, Huage, pavilions of paintings, Jibao-yuan, courtyards of treasures, and Chengqi-lo, houses of military equipment. After visiting the British Museum, a Japanese delegation coined a new term, Hakubutsukan, mansion of boundless things. This book tells the story of yet another kind of museum. Benoît de l'Étoile identified it as le musée des autres. I call it the Museum of Other People. Conceived in the 1830s and 1840s, the Museum of Other People put on display an exotic world of primitive or tribal peoples who lived far away or long ago. Its golden age began with the wave of European colonialism in Africa and Oceania in the 1880s. It then went into decline in the era of decolonization in the 1960s. Museums of ethnology and anthropology in the USA followed a similar trajectory, emerging at the height of colonization of the territories west of the Mississippi, Indian country, and giving way to identity museums in the 1980s. By the 21st century, the Museum of Other People confronted a full-blown crisis. This may be terminal. The first plans for the Museum of Other People were drawn up in Paris, Leiden, Copenhagen, and Dresden. In 1845, the British Museum installed an ethnographic gallery. In 1846, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. established a department of ethnology. At the same time, societies of anthropologists and ethnologists were founded, part of a new wave of learned societies that were coming to terms with an industrializing, urbanizing, imperialist Europe. Governments assumed responsibility for education, poor relief, public health, and policing, functions once left largely to parish authorities. For reasons of state and commerce, European powers began a new round of land grabs in faraway lands. Modernizing bureaucracies found themselves in urgent need of facts and ideas. In 1836, Lord John Russell, who served twice as Prime Minister of Britain, declared, "We are busy introducing system, method, science, economy, regularity, and discipline." A new breed of statisticians delivered the data. Positivists in France and utilitarians in England proposed methods and theories, and a cluster of new sciences emerged. Michel Foucault called them human sciences, while admitting that he used the term sciences loosely. The body of knowledge, though even that word is perhaps a little too strong, let us say, to be more neutral still, the body of discourse, that takes as its object man as an empirical entity. As the philosopher and historian of science Ian Hacking remarked, the new human sciences were making up kinds of people. Ethnologists and anthropologists began to investigate the character, habits, and customs of a very particular kind of people. Once known as savages, they were now, in a scientific era, identified as primitive, stuck in an early stage of human development. These primitive people were distinguished by their race, culture, or degree of civilization, terms coined in the last decades of the 18th century. Anthropologists distinguished populations by race. Ethnologists concerned themselves with culture or civilization. However, disciplinary labels were expansive, overlapping, and often a matter of contention. William Edwards, son of a Jamaican planter who founded the Société ethnologique de Paris in 1839, claimed that the term ethnology had the double advantage that it lent itself to generalization and designated indifferently the study of races or of peoples. In 1843, James Cowles Pritchard, author of the first English textbook in the field, defined ethnology as the study of the history of peoples, and laid down that it must be mainly founded on the relations of their languages. In 1859, Paul Broca, a professor of anatomy at the Sorbonne, set up the Société d'anthropologie de Paris, the first learned society to adopt the title anthropology, an old term for the philosophical contemplation of the human condition. He dismissed the ethnologists as do-gooders, obsessed with slavery, their motivation not truly scientific. They were, he complained, deplorably reluctant to acknowledge the radical importance of biological differences. Armed with 18 signatures of potential members, Broca approached the Ministry of Public Education for permission to form his society. The minister hesitated. As a historian, Francis Schiller summed up official concerns. Worse than ethnology, which smacked only of anti-slavery, anthropology suggested subversion and the spirit of 1848, something vaguely degrading to man's immortal soul, possibly in conflict with the teachings of the Church and the interests of the Empire. Permission was granted, but on 2 conditions. First, they must never talk politics or religion. Second, a plainclothes officer of the Imperial Police must be present at each session and report to headquarters. Broca enjoyed reminiscing about the time the attendant policeman asked whether he might be excused. "There will be nothing interesting today, I suppose. May I go?" "No, no, my friend," Broca replied. "You must not go for a walk. Sit down and earn your pay." In London, too, ethnologists and anthropologists were at daggers drawn. In 1842, the Aborigines Protection Society resolved that the best way to help native peoples was to study them. This was contentious. The missionary element in the society resisted. A year later, the secretary of the APS, Richard King, and 2 Quaker physicians, Thomas Buxton and Thomas Hodgkin, formed the London Ethnological Society. The members were anti-slavery and committed to the doctrine that all human races had a common origin. In 1863, in the heat of the American Civil War, a frankly racist faction broke away and set up the Anthropological Society of London. A year later, its leader, James Hunt, published On the Negro's Place in Nature, in which he asserted the separate origin of the various human races and defended slavery. The inner circle of the Anthropological Society formed the Cannibal Club, which was called to order with a gavel carved in the shape of an African head. Hunt was even more dismissive of the ethnologists that Broca had been. These opponents of comparative anthropology suffered arrested brain growth and, from what I will call respectively, the religious mania and the rights of man mania. Hunt died in 1869. In 1871, the year in which Darwin's The Descent of Man was published, the feuding London societies merged under the leadership of Thomas Henry Huxley, John Lubbock, and General Augustus Lane Fox, later Pitt Rivers. They were all Darwinians. Indeed, one commentator complained that the new society promised to be little more than a sort of Darwinian club. The choice of a name for the society was a final bone of contention. Lubbock, intervening in a heated debate at the British Association for the Advancement of Science, said that he looked upon anthropology as an ugly name for ethnology. Ethnology was an older word, and a prettier word than anthropology. But after much heart-searching, and despite a rearguard action by the fervently anti-racist Lady Lubbock, the new association was named Anthropological. Museums of Civilization, the Louvre, the British Museum, New York's Metropolitan Museum, embodied the Enlightenment theory of history. All humans...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?